I'm your host, Ed Clark. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. We're here a little bit early. It's before the 4th of July. The 4th of July weekend is coming up upon us, so we decided to do the show early this week. So you're seeing us here on Thursday, July the 2nd. We have a full-packed episode today. We got a lot of people with us, joining us remotely. From Wilmington will be two of the city council members from Wilmington, North Carolina, Clifford, Barnett, and Kevin Spears. Also joining us today is Val Atkinson, our normal political analysis guy that we go to guy, and then Al McSurely, who is a noted civil rights attorney. We're glad to have him on. He works closely with the Reverend William Barber. And then in our second segment, we'll have Rob Scholfield from the North Carolina Policy Watch organization that monitors all things government. He's going to help us figure out what's going on, not just in North Carolina, but what's going on and how North Carolina is going to impact national events like the Cunningham versus Thom Tillis race. But we got so much going on. We got so little time. So without further ado, I want to bring in Val Atkinson. And Val, kind of catch us up on what's been going on. Give me your assessment of the monuments coming down, what the political climate is in North Carolina, coronavirus, whatever. You talk to me about what we got going on.
My first demonstration was in Portsmouth, Virginia in 1955. And since then, a lot of water has gone under the bridge and a lot of things have changed. But I've never seen it this way, as many young white people out there. And I think that's made the difference. Speaking of the monuments, for an example, I don't believe we would have had the success that we've had, not only throughout North Carolina, but throughout the nation, in taking down, toppling some of these Confederate statues, had we not had the participation from our brethren. Now, what is it going to take going forward? Well, it's going to take the same type of cooperation, the same commitment, but I think this time all hands are going to have to be on deck. We're going to have to get the politicians. We're going to have our academicians. We're going to have our business community involved. We're going to have everybody involved on this one, because we're too close, Ed. We're too close to turn around now. We've never been this close.
I hear you, Val. I want to go ahead and bring in our guest for today, Clifford Barnett, who's on the City Council of Wilmington, and also Kevin Spears and Al McSurely. Let me start with you, Clifford Barnett.
Sure.
First, thanks for taking the time to come in with us. We know from stories that have started appearing nationally that there were some police officers in Wilmington who weren't doing the right thing. They were caught on video saying some very vile things. And at the same time, you guys were installing a new police chief, Donnie Williams, to take over. He had been interim chief since February. Talk to me about how you guys came across this news, and what is the council's position been on how Chief Williams handled the situation?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for allowing us to be on your program. We came across the news because Chief Williams found it. It was an internal investigation that they did. No one pointed it out to them. He found it by looking at some videos. That's what they normally do. They were looking at some videos, And so the lady who was looking at the videos had said, well, let me look at some videos that normally go in a certain stack. And so she pulled this video out, and she thought that what she heard was not appropriate. And so she immediately gave it to the chief, and then immediately Chief Williams took the actions that he did. The city council was 100% behind him, and he is just doing a fantastic job. And Kevin Spears, my colleague, knows Chief Williams really well. He grew up with him, but he's an awesome man. He started as a cadet and worked his way through to become the chief of police. And he was by far the best candidate without question.
Well, then we can bring in Kevin Spears on that. Kevin,
sure.
Talk to us about Chief Donnie Williams and your confidence in him in getting these things sorted out for the city.
Well, I think like Clifford said, I've known Donnie for the better part of 30 years, I believe, probably 35 years. We grew up in similar neighborhoods. You know, he grew up in Creekwood. I grew up in Turnkey. He was a friend of an older cousin. So whenever I would visit, you know, we would all get together and play and ride bikes and things of that nature. And, you know, I've just watched Donnie come through the process. And, you know, like Clifford said, he started out as a cadet. He took probably a career choice that wasn't popular coming from the neighborhood that he grew up in. And you know, he's excelled at it. And that's a great story for Wilmingtonians in general, but that's a great story for young Black Wilmingtonians to see that, you know, our due diligence can pay off. You know, being a part of the process, that's a thing that I've been saying, you know, prior to my campaign, during my campaign, and now. You know, we need to see people be involved in every part of the process, whether it's police, whether it's the judicial system, whether it's you know, every part of the process that we need to be involved in, social services, just everything. And so this, you know, even though it's law enforcement, it gives us the right direction that we need to look into. You know, we're talking about equity. We're talking about equity in the system now, and this is how we get equity in the system, by participating in the system. You know, the other thing is to look at Clifford and I. We're involved in politics. We're involved in government. You know, we want equity in this system, and this is what we're hearing nationwide and ultimately worldwide. We want equity in society.
I hear you, Kevin. I want to bring in Al McSurely now. Al, we know the history of Wilmington. Wilmington was the largest city in North Carolina for a long time. And going into 1898 was a very prosperous area for African Americans. They were the majority, and they ran the government, and they ran businesses there. And there was the only coup in American history happened in Wilmington on November 10th, 1898, because the Fusion Party, the Republicans and the Progressives had maintained control after the election. Talk to me about Wilmington over the years, because we also have the Wilmington 10 story that so many of us know about and some don't, that need to know about. Talk to me about how this current story about these police officers kind of work into the history of Wilmington.
Well, when I heard what the cops were caught saying, you know, I immediately thought about the importance of these videotapes. It's just like with Big George Floyd. If we didn't have the videotapes, we wouldn't be where we were. And, you know, my belief, although most people know me as a lawyer, before I became a lawyer when I was 50 years old, graduating from the Gray Law School of Central, I was a revolutionary in the Black Power movement. Basically in Kentucky, but all across the South. I worked for SNCC and SCEF, SCF, and CORE, working with Stokely Carmichael, Rap Brown, and various brothers of mine who had put their lives on the line And I believe that the fusion, that was the aim of the movement in Wilmington. Reverend Barber shortened it to moral fusion, because the problem was winning reliable white allies. You were talking about how the white brothers and sisters are starting to come out now. It's really the new generation that has benefited from the Moral Monday movement, from H.K. on J, from the moral fusion line, the strategic line that Reverend Barber's been pushing for about 15, 20 years now.
At least, yeah.
And remember, he was brought up in Plymouth, North Carolina. He's from East North Carolina, and right down the road to Wilmington. And he knew that whole story. So my belief is that there's a direct line from Wilmington, from November 10th, 1898 in Wilmington, to where to today. And that line, if I were forced to put it in one sentence, is finding moral white people. We got to stop using race at that point. The minute you put moral in it, then we're talking about God's people. And what we've done is to create. I remember Ann Braden. I got a picture of Ella Baker behind me. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
I worked with Ella and Ann Braden and with SCEF, and Ella and Ann always said, "How do you get white people to join the movement?" That's always been a problem, because we black people are minorities. That's why they want us to remember that word, minority. So the minute we get into electoral politics, which is arithmetic, as the two brothers that have to run for office, no, that's pure mathematics. You've got to get some allies. You got to get some people that you can depend upon. So Ann and Ella Baker used to say, how do you win white people to this struggle against racism? And they say, any way you can. Any way you can.
I hear you. I hear you. I want to remind the folks.
Where we are right now. We need to open our arms, and we need to bring these young white people in and get them working, because once they get out there and see how bad it is, it's so bad, as I don't need telling you, but it's so bad that most white people, it takes them 2 or 3 years to grasp how the system of racism really works.
Right. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I want to remind the folks that you're listening to and watching The Deal, and we got a really good panel today. We got Clifford Barnett, who's with the Wilmington City Council. Also, Kevin Spears is joining us by audio. As always, Val Atkinson, and we have a really special guest, Al McSurely, noted civil rights attorney. Clifford Barnett, I think you wanted to,
yes, sir.
add something.
I was going to say that I think one of the things that makes the Wilmington situation so unique, and not necessarily unique, but eye-opening, is all the things that are happening around the world or in the country at this present time. At this present time, with what happened with George Floyd and what happened with the protests, and then for us to find that audio tape. It was an audio tape. We didn't see faces. We heard the audio voice. What happened? One of the police officers forgot to turn off his Bluetooth. Yeah. And he just started calling his friends and had that kind of conversation. And so I think that what we also need to do is, you talk about getting moral white people involved, is we look for sustainable change. And we just don't look for people to protest, just to march, but we're looking for folks to go to the polls and elect right people, and then stick to the fire. But I agree with you, Ed, when you said that now is the present time. Because of all this going on around us, we aren't going to get any closer. I think Val said that. We're not going to get any closer than where we are right now. Right now is a prime time. And I think that what we heard in Wilmington is a model for the nation, because what we really believe is that it's not just those 3 cops, that there's a systemic piece that we've got to deal with.
Absolutely on that, Clifford. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Ed, if I might, to pose that type of question to Kevin. And I want to know what's your plan, or what do you think needs to be done at the local levels here? We're talking about municipal governments now.
Yes.
what needs to be done to ensure that people like these three officers don't get into the system in large, okay? In other words, I think we need to find out whether or not we recruited these officers and they had that type of attitude about themselves before they became officers, or did the culture of the police department produce that in these people that we've already recruited? Is there any talk in the Wilmington City Council about what you guys are going to do to make positive change in a department that really affects the lives of Black people every day?
That's a good question, Val. And I'll be honest about it. I went to school with one of the officers. I went to high school with one of the officers. You know, and you know, I'm from that really competitive sports era, you know. And I remember some of the battles we had between my friends and Officer Piner's, ex-Officer Piner's friends, and they didn't really like him. So, you know, when this news comes out, I said to myself, you know what, I could see that. But there were some people who worked with Officer Piner, and they couldn't detect that. They could not detect that from him. And so that's the systemic piece. You know, he appeared to be a good officer for almost 30 years. I believe he was on the force for 28 years. And he cloaked himself as a good officer, but he had these types of thoughts and beliefs. And I don't think the pressure, being in the pressure cooker right now, brings that out of you. I mean, I woke up this morning and my car didn't crank. I'm not taking it out on Al. You know what I mean? So, you know,
you should. He did.
So that was some deep down hatred.
Yeah.
And for one of the things he said, like, this is not, I stubbed my toe. He said, we're going to go out and kill some folks, right?
Yeah.
And that should set them back 4 or 5 generations. That's not out of anger. That's calculated hate. That's embedded in the system. That is to eradicate certain people from society. And he also said that, hey, once we kill some, the good ones that are left, they'll live in their community and we'll live in ours and we'll be okay. And so that's a challenge for the city council. That's a challenge for people in general, because we're out here right now and we're sitting next to and we're riding beside and we're shaking hands with some people who appear to be allies, but deep down inside, they're trying to set you back 4 or 5 generations. And we've had enough resistance. We had enough problems going forward. So, you know, this is going to be, and it's been tough. And Clifford, I know you can speak to this. I got an email the other day sent to council that said I was a racist. And, you know, I've been called a lot of things in my life, but never a racist. But that goes to show that this process that we're in, and Val said it, and Al, you stated it too. We're as close as we've ever been. And it's kind of retrospective because we're in 2020 and we're dealing with these issues still. But now the racists and the bigots have become uncomfortable. To see their idols come down, to see that, you know, the cloak being pulled back and the hood being pulled off, and we're seeking you out wherever you are. And if you're embedded in that system, Clifford, you know it, we're going to speak to you being embedded in that system. Even if you smile in our face every day and you call me a colleague, it's your mannerisms and the things that you say that we find problematic, and us as being government officials and people being involved in society, we have to get these people out.
Yeah,
I think that part of it is.
Go ahead, Clifford.
I'm sorry, as you mentioned too, it's systemic. I think that, you know, the answer is, I think that we do recruit guys like that, but then I also think that part of the system helps to keep them like that. So we got to work on both ends. We've got to also, I think, improve the hiring processes. Maybe have some citizens a part of that, because there are certain questions you can ask that will help you to get a barometer as to whether or not this person has certain feelings about different people. But then also, I think we also need to go on the other end and make our police officers be more accountable to the citizens by saying, this guy messed up and we need to report him. Because a lot of times, they don't report. They got that blue code. You're my brother and I didn't see that. We've got to do better with that. And so part of that is the defunding piece. Not necessarily taking all the money out of the department, but putting more money into maybe training and other things so that we can in turn get the kind of police officers that we deserve.
I want to remind the listeners and viewers you're watching The Deal with Ed Clark and Val Atkinson, Clifford, Barnett, Kevin Spears, and Al McSurely. And we've been talking about what's going on in Wilmington, North Carolina. Wilmington, I think, rightly stated by, I think, everybody on the panel today, is sort of a barometer of what's going on in the United States. I mean, there are police officers that we know that are racist and harbor racist views, but they can't be uncovered. Just by accident, 3 officers were uncovered because one of them turned on a recording. And you notice I haven't mentioned their names. I mean, I started to at the beginning, but at this point, I want the system to deal with them the way they should be dealt with, and we'll hear their names more later on. We'll revisit this issue in the coming weeks. But first off, I want to thank Clifford, Barnett, and Kevin Spears for even taking the time to do this. I mean, you got other things to do. And one of the things that we've been trying to do on The Deal and on the connection on Connections is talk to people about real issues, about real ways to get at correcting some of these things. And I think the city of Wilmington is really fortunate to have you two on the council. And I think some things are going to get done. So first off, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to participate this morning.
No, thanks for having us. Can I add this one thing, Ed?
Sure.
Just to piggyback off of what Clifford said and the question that Val asked. So here's the thing. When we see these injustices, right, and we talk about systemic racism, we're reporting racists and bigots to a racist and bigoted system. So we don't find a resolve in that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Until we are put in HR, until that's right. We have to clean the system. But until we're involved in HR, until we're instated into the hierarchy of organizations, until we're creating policies, it's going to take this again. It's going to take this 50 years down the road again before we even get this close again. If we don't put our foot on the gas right now. So, like Clifford said, it's going to take more than marching and holding signs and doing that. We have to understand that the system is broken. This is a trap that they created over 400 years ago, and it's still working to a T.
I hear you, Kevin Spears.
Right. Can I have one
sure.
comment? I just want to say that I am more hopeful today than ever. Okay, I really believe that we are getting close to where we desire to go. I'm more hopeful because I think Val mentioned it, that we see a whole group of people, a different group of people. I say it like this: that we see great-great-grandchildren of slaves and great-great-grandchildren of slave owners holding up signs, talking to each other, and they're turning around and saying to their mom, their dads, and their granddads, we got to do better. We got to do better. We got to make a change. So I'm excited. And Wilmington is still a great place to live, and it's a good place to visit. So come, spend your money so you can help pay our salaries. God bless you guys.
But don't come until after COVID-19 goes down.
I was going to throw that in. You're
Wait
right
a little bit.
Yeah, you're right about that. Well, Clifford Barnett and Kevin Spears, I want to thank you so much for being with us in this first segment.
Anytime.
We're going to take a small break, and when we come back, I'm going to come back with Al McSurely and Val Atkinson, and we're going to figure out everything that's going on in the world, and we're going to solve all the world's problems in the next 20 minutes. So in the meantime, we're going to take a small break, and when we come back, I'll be back with Val Atkinson and Al McSurely, and you're watching The Deal.
I love New York. We love New York.
We've been stuck inside our homes,
while our everyday heroes have been working overtime.
For New York to reopen
and stay open.
We all need to do our part.
And show that we care.
Look, man.
I wear a mask to protect you.
You wear a mask to protect me.
Let's all wear a mask
to stop the spread of coronavirus
and save lives.
When we show up in the mask,
we're showing up for each other.
Show your love for New York.
Because New York loves you.
Hello and welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and we've been fortunate to have some folks from Wilmington in the first segment, Councilman Barnett and Spears. They were talking about the recent firing of police officers in Wilmington and the new chief, Donnie Williams, who just by sheer accident discovered that there were police officers there who were making some very violent racist comments. Unfortunately, they've been relieved of their duty. But we also talked about the hope that Wilmington also will help us do better. They got two very good councilmen on there that are trying to do some things. In this next segment, though, I want to bring in Val Atkinson and Al McSurely and talk about all of the things that have been going on in the last couple of months. We start with George Floyd, just kind of wrap that up. Al, we'll start with you. The world is funny. George Floyd had a connection to North Carolina. He was born in Fayetteville. One of the ministers that did the prayer at the funeral that was in Hope Mills is my minister at my church in Bun Level. I go to Minneapolis all the time for my work, and I've been in that store where George Floyd was killed. It's just those connections sometimes that are just incredible. But it goes to show you how this the interconnectivity of the world and this sort of spirit of George Floyd is now causing all these statues to come down in police departments to do the right thing and city councils to do the right thing. It's a shame that he died. I guess that's not even the right word. It's more than a shame. It was criminal that he died. But what came out of that has been a lot. Can you talk to me about what your hope is with all these statues coming down, all these kids out in the street protesting? Where are we moving towards, and what is your hope for the future based on what we're seeing now?
Well, I was thinking, Reverend Barber, most of you know him. And Ed, Fred Battle, my good friend that just died in Chapel Hill. Yeah. Both of them were pulling guards. That's why Fred was pretty big in his day, and everybody knows how big Reverend Barber is. He put on all that weight to be a pulling guard at Central and at high school. And so I would start with a football thing. We need to move to change right now. I used to use the word ratchet, like you ratchet up something. Right. Now, 13, 14, 15, we ratcheted up with those amendments, this victory that we had won over slavery. But I think the better analogy is football. We need to move to change. We got a first down. We demonstrated over the George Floyd month, we'll call it. We demonstrated that there were some white people out there. Remember how when Obama won some white votes? We demonstrated that there were some white people out there that would actually understand, got it. sometimes I lose total faith in that. I know black people do that on the edge, cutting edge of the movement. Reverend Barber, for some reason, I think it's his Bible training, believes, has faith that there's enough white people out there that we can pull together this moral fusion movement. So I think our first step is to move the change, first down, we call it first down, assess where we are, and then go for another 10 yards. We don't need to score a touchdown immediately. All of us, we all got a little age on us. We know this thing is going to take a little time, but we need to ratchet up this victory right now. We need to fool these young white people, and it's really young people in general that we're getting in, that have either gone to integrated schools, have fallen in love with each other, have mixed, doing some race mixing, whatever you want to call it. Those are the kids that are out there. So I think that's the way to view where we are right now.
Well, Val, we are very thankful that the movement seems to have expanded quite a bit. I do worry, though, that some of the young people don't have a good enough sense of the history, and they also don't have a good enough sense of how politics work, right? That they haven't been involved and engaged in that part. So, and Val, you've been involved in party politics before. Who are the young people that are coming up that would even be available to run for things or to do things? Do you see any of those people emerging out of this, what's happened in the last couple of months?
That's a good question.
It's a great question. And I see some people on the national level who are trying to step up and take leadership positions. I think one of the differences that we really need to make sure we stay aware of, Ed and Al, is the fact that back during the movement, the civil rights movement, we don't have, and I got to admit that I watch a lot of TV and I watch a lot of movies, and I'm watching Godfather Fallen right now with Forrest Whitaker. And there was a couple of scenes in the movie that there was Malcolm X, Adam Clayton Powell, Bumpy Johnson, and then they were talking about Martin Luther King. I mean, these are giants. And right around the corner was a guy named Muhammad Ali that got involved in some ways to do some things. And I'm saying, I asked myself, what happened to the status of the likes of those guys today? Well, two of them just left. And we're talking about the city councilman down in Wilmington.
Right.
Back during the 50s and 60s that we're talking about, there weren't opportunities to be on the city council. There weren't opportunities to be mayor. There weren't opportunities to be a lot of things that some of our leaders, our more educated people, our more capable people, they went directly to the source. They went to the streets. They became leaders because they couldn't do some of these other things. Some of our people who have leadership skills and qualities now have taken political jobs. They've taken business jobs. Some of them are academicians. They do a lot of different things now because opportunity is there that was paved. The way it was paved by these same people I'm talking about now. The initial people, they paved the way for these people. So I think that answers in some small part the question of where are our leaders today?
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter where they are. We've got to find them, because when you look at guys like Al McSurely and Val Atkinson, there's a whole lot more in the rearview mirror than it is the windshield.
You got that right.
I hear you. I want to switch gears for just a second.
You're young.
Yeah, I want to switch gears for just a second and talk about some national politics. Donald Trump is the president until November, or until January at least, right? Mm-hmm. We can't do anything about that. The impeachment effort failed, but there's like a avalanche of news every day that's negative about Donald Trump, what he's doing, how he's not managing COVID, how he maybe has some dealings with the Russians still, and U.S. troops may have been killed because of bounties on soldiers, but he still maintains some popularity amongst some people. And there is still a chance that he could still be president when we get to January 20th in the swearing in, if people aren't able to vote. And Al, I want to turn to you. What is the folks you're talking to doing to try to ensure that when November comes around, that people will be able to vote and hopefully get Donald Trump out of office? We know there's efforts to keep people from voting. So what's going on that front in trying to make sure people are able to vote?
One thing with those of us who live on the Cape Fearless, I call it the Cape Fearless River, we need to change the name. And the Cape Fearless River Valley, from Wilmington on up to where I'm sitting today, which is in Carthage in Moore County, is all the way up to Chatham County. Actually, that's where the Cape Fear River runs out. We need to begin to see ourselves in a regional way. We need to, Wilmington has always had its own set of politics, I think because of 1898, and I think because of Wilmington 10, and there, specific things happened in the largest city in North Carolina. That's the way to think about it. It was the largest, it was the New York City of North Carolina. It was the best port in the world. The port is exactly like New York City. It's the southern New York City port. It's the closest port to Africa, to Mother Africa. And what they were really worried about was if that fusion movement developed, there would be trading developed. That port would have been dug deep, and it would have been the largest port on the Atlantic seaboard. Charleston beat it out, as you know, if you've been to Charleston, South Carolina. They saw that opportunity and they put a whole lot of money into their port. So we need to be thinking like that. Now, if we started thinking about the Cape Fearless River Valley Development Agency, or whatever you want to call it, I want to call it economic and human development. I want to call it curriculum rectification movement, because there's all this talk about the slave quarters there in Fayetteville and all that stuff. Reverend Spearman's working right now on a big piece with Tim Tyson and 10 other historians about how to write that whole history of those slave quarters. All of that, we got Patricia Timmons Goodinson running. What she knows that area like the back of her hands. Remember, she was like me. She was a civil rights lawyer for most of her life. That's what people don't understand about Patricia. So she knows that area, and she's the best candidate we could get. So all I'm saying is, I'm trying to get some positive things in here, because I think we got a River Valley Development Agency, or whatever you want to call it. And part of that development has to be curriculum rectification. We have to go in and get libraries, make libraries in the community centers. We ought to make jails into libraries. I'm a big person on libraries, because we've got to get our kids, and every library, has Wi-Fi in it, all that stuff. It's like coffee houses, but that bourgeois white people do. I want our kids to go to libraries after school. It's no, where you actually have a book in your hand and you're reading it.
So there's a multi-pronged effort
from the
so there's a multi-pronged effort to try to get it. We're having a little bit of feedback on your line, Al. Let me turn to Val real quick and pose the same question. What are we to expect? We know they're going to throw out every effort as possible. Like Al is saying, we got to make sure we maintain our coalitions, work to have candidates that are going to be candidates that drive people out to vote. at these lower levels to make sure that when time comes for the general election for president, that we have enough people, because North Carolina really could vote for Biden this time around, just like they did Obama in 2008. But what is the likelihood? Like I said, there's still a lot of people who support Donald Trump, even here in North Carolina. How do you go about ensuring that people, make it to the polls?
Well, the key is turnout. Bottom line is turnout. We know that there's going to be a voter suppression measure put on by Donald Trump supporters and put on by those folks who don't want to see equality and don't want to see the things that a Democratic candidate would bring to that office. So we know that already. We just don't know what form it will take. So the only way we can prepare for that is have overwhelming turnout. To have turnout so great that it makes up for and compensates for the voter suppression that we know is going to take place. And we're talking about motivating ourselves, our friends, our colleagues, even strangers. We got to have a motivational effect out there that is equal to a pandemic almost, a motivational effect that people can't withstand the pressure that's put on them to vote. We've got to make it so that they hear that so much everywhere they go. When they're out asking a young lady for a date, her retort is, "Are you registered? Are you planning to vote?" And, once we can get it that far, we can get it into the minds, the hearts of all of our people, young, old, and the middle. We have a chance, but we've got to have one of the biggest turnouts that we have ever had. I think the numbers are right now, we make up about 22% African Americans of the population here in North Carolina, but we make up about 20% of the electorate. And there was one election back, I think it was 2008, if I'm not mistaken, we outperformed our electorate numbers. That has to be our goal. We have to outperform. When it's all said and done, I want the African American participation to be greater than 20%. That's our goal, to make sure that we have a chance to win.
I hear you there. So in the time that we got left here, I want to turn one more time to Al McSurely. I know you've been doing a lot of work with Reverend Barber. He's been out there, I see him online a lot. He's trying to use this technology in light of the coronavirus and the inability for people to get together. What's coming up in the movement on that side? On what events are coming up? What things are you guys working on to try to keep the momentum up with this coronavirus making it very difficult for people to meet and see each other?
Well, I think the two areas that Reverend Barber is out in front of all the moral leaders, we'll call it the moral leaders, and that are, emerging. The one is his great religious and organizational skills within the real evangelical movement. That is, people who believe Jesus brought good news. Evangelicism means good news. That's all it means. I bring you good news. And Reverend Barber, I know this weekend he is working with 180 ministers across the country, teaching them, what does your July 4th mean to me, the Frederick Douglass thing. He's making all them read that. He's got them all on a Zoom like you got us, and they're all reading it to each other. And many of them, we're talking about mainly white preachers, many of them are not familiar with that. This George Floyd thing has been opening up Christian ministers. They're mainly Christians, but he has Muslims and Jewish people. He has all kinds of people that he works on doing. And what Trump and them don't know, is that he has thousands of preachers working with him right now. and every major Protestant sect, so that the moral or spiritual movement, ethical movement, sometimes we call it, is the key thing. The other is that he has built strong ties with the gay and lesbian community, LGBTQ community. And the one thing that a lot of people don't know is when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, they put a Title 10 in that, which was called the CRS, the Community Relations Service. Val, you might remember that. And the Community Relations Service, as opposed to every other federal agency, has a specific duty to work with LGBTQ. They passed this. Matthew Shepard, some of you remember a kid named Bird was dragged around Texas. Mm-hmm. And a kid named Matthew Shepard was hung on a barbed wire fence. That's the way I remember. Mm-hmm. All of that is in the law, and that was assigned to the Community Relations Service. There's a whole new movement that has started from some people in our district. Jim Davis, you know him, and down where you're from, Ed, Jim and Christine. They have started a CRS alumni association, like Vista and Peace Corps used to do that, David, and they are pushing to get there's some talk to bring back a truth and reconciliation. You're going to be hearing much more about that. That was the line we used when we came down to Wilmington with John Hope Franklin and did our big piece on the 1898 thing. At first you need truth, then reconciliation. That's the rule. First you need truth. And to get truth, you have to study on it. You have to do some thinking, and that's a good exercise. I'm talking to the choir here, but I'm saying some of our younger people, they think they now have the truth, and they really don't yet have the truth. We got to develop that a little bit. And then we can do reconciliation. So those are the two areas that I think Reverend Barber and the influence that he has in the broader movement. He's still on the board of the National NAACP. He still works directly with Derek Johnson and I do too. That all of the National NAACP, has supported the Poor People's Campaign. That's what we call this initiative that he has.
Well, that's a lot, and we need to keep it up. I'm gonna end with you, Val. We got a few minutes left here. Can you tell me, the 4th of July is this weekend, and I'm pretty sure you have big plans to shoot off fireworks and celebrate the freedom of African Americans on July the 4th. So in the midst of that, what do you think we need to be thinking about as we approach this holiday weekend?
Well, I can just share with you a conversation that my wife and I had a few days ago. I said, what a great opportunity to lay the foundation for a dual celebration sometime in the near future. Now that Juneteenth has been put on the map for so many people because of Tulsa and the lack of knowledge around the country about what Juneteenth is and so many other things. Wouldn't it be something to consider that, Juneteenth and the 4th of July is only a matter of a couple of weeks apart? And wouldn't it be nice to see people celebrating both at both times? It would be wonderful to see on June 19th, see the Juneteenth flag and people waving the stars and stripes. And then on the 4th, you see people waving the stars and stripes and the Juneteenth flag. It would be wonderful. But we're not there yet. But I'm saying that would be a celebration. That would be a sort of a physical outlay of something accomplished if we can go through the truth and reconciliation and all of the other things, the police changes and all of the things that we're fighting for right now. I look forward to the day that Americans in general will be glad and proud to celebrate the freedom of both Juneteenth and July 4th.
And that would be a day, wouldn't it?
Mm,
Well,
that would be a day.
well, you know what? We're about to run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank Al McSurely for coming in with us, and hopefully we can have you back soon. And you know, we still got a lot of problems we need to solve. So we're going to need to talk with you some more, and maybe get Reverend Barber on here as well. And then Val Atkinson, of course, as always, we'll be back next week, and then next Sunday we'll be back on WFXC and WFXK on Foxy 107, 104 on Connections. In the meantime, I need for you guys to hang on. Rob Scholfield is going to be with us when we come back. He is the director of North Carolina Policy Watch. We want to talk about the past legislative session. And I know we have viewers and listeners from all over the country, but North Carolina is a bellwether for a lot of stuff. And the other thing I want to talk to him about is the seat of Thom Tillis and how he's in trouble, and how Cunningham, who was a guest with us a couple of weeks ago, has a real opportunity to become the next senator for the state of North Carolina. So everybody hold on. We'll be right back. You're watching The Deal.
George Floyd. His name was George Floyd. Say his name.
Say his name.
George Floyd. Say his name.
Say their names. Once again and always, we fight for justice. Black Lives Matter. Go to blacklivesmatter.com.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and thanks for joining us. I asked you to wait around because I wanted you to see this guy, Rob Scholfield. He's with North Carolina Policy Watch. You can catch him on TV sometimes, and he's on their website, North Carolina Policy Watch website, with some daily updates about what's going on in North Carolina. I know this program, we have listeners and viewers in the UK and everywhere else, but and all across America, but North Carolina is sort of a bellwether for me. I've been to 48 states, Rob Scholfield, and again, thanks for coming in. I've been to 48 of the 50 states, and whenever I'm away from home, I'm often reminded how advanced North Carolina is, how large North Carolina is, how much influence North Carolina has. And I was looking at this last legislative session and some of the ones prior, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And one of the things that is clear is that people that are sort of on the bottom rung of things are catching hell. And one of the reasons why is unemployment here in North Carolina is kind of sketchy as to how much you can get. Right now, there's a $600 per week boost that's probably going to go away pretty soon. I'm saying a mouthful. I haven't even let you have a chance to talk. But I wanted to talk about what the legislature in Raleigh has done over the last 5, 6, 7 years to make it hard for working class people to make it. And now that we have a pandemic, we're seeing clearly what they've done. Can you talk to me about that?
Absolutely, Ed. Well, thanks for having me. I mean, really for the last decade, the better part of the last decade, North Carolina has been almost sort of like a lab experiment for Trumpism. It was sort of where some of the bugs got worked out or maybe got reinforced over the last several years in so many different areas. The General Assembly has really waged a war on the public structures and public systems that North Carolina had struggled mightily to make maybe average on a national basis. And they've just pulled the rug out from under them. I worked for many years with a dear colleague named Bill Rowe, who is one of the experts on unemployment insurance in our state, has been working on that topic since the early 90s, really the late 80s. And over a period of a couple of decades, this was under Democratic control, mind you. It wasn't like things were all great then. He worked diligently at the General Assembly to get little changes made here and there to benefits, to eligibility, to the duration of benefits, to the prohibitions on getting benefits. And by the end of the last decade, maybe by 2009, 2010, North Carolina had kind of a middle of the pack average system. Wasn't overly generous by any means, but it was making some headway. In 2013, the North Carolina Republican leadership came in and just totally destroyed it. Many legislators were very openly hostile to the idea of unemployment insurance. They believe it is welfare, it's socialism, it's something we shouldn't even have in the first place. They took what had been a sort of middle of the pack system and took it to the bottom of the country. And that actually wasn't just an unemployment insurance. It was in a whole other raft of areas because there's been this really ideological war being waged in our state. And of course, Dale Folwell, who's now the treasurer of the state, was put in after he lost a couple of elections and he needed a job, and Pat McCrory made him the secretary that was the chairman of the Department of Employment Security. I forget what his official title was, commissioner chairman. He sort of oversaw that system, and in addition to sort of implementing these draconian cuts in benefits and eligibility that made it so that something like less than 1 in 10 unemployed people in North Carolina was even getting unemployment insurance, they made the whole system, designed it so that it discouraged you from applying. I mean, when you went to the website, there was something right there on the website that was like telling you were going to go to jail if you did anything wrong here. So it was just a message delivered that this is a system we don't want to use. And so then now superimpose an historic crisis caused by the pandemic, unemployment, and on a system that was barely doing its job at a most minimal level with a tiny fragment of that many people unemployed. And it was just immediately overwhelmed. The Cooper administration has been trying, sometimes doing some good work, sometimes probably not so good, to try and get that system ratcheted back up as quickly as they can. But it's still a bottom of the barrel system that doesn't pay good benefits. We're lucky to have this federal money, that's this infusion, at least maybe to the end of this month. But if we go back to the North Carolina system, it's a flawed system. And again, it's emblematic of the whole sort of across the board assault on public structures and services in this state that's been going on for the last decade, and really did serve as sort of a warm up for, it was a model for many of the things Congress has been doing since Trump took over.
Sure. I want to remind the listeners and viewers, you're watching The Deal with Ed Clark, and I'm happy to have Rob Scholfield back in with us again from North Carolina Policy Watch. He's kind enough to give us a few minutes today. It's July the 2nd, Rob Scholfield. And this morning I got up and I saw a headline about unemployment numbers nationally, saying that there was an increase in 4 million jobs. And of course, I expect the president this afternoon to try it out and make some hay about that. Do we know what the reality is in North Carolina about people who are working and how they're getting along really? A lot of these numbers are funny numbers in my book. I mean, have you guys looked at, who's really working in North Carolina and what those numbers look like?
I mean, we know that there are 1 million people, who've applied for unemployment insurance in a state of 10 million people. We have huge unemployment numbers. They're disproportionately impacting people who are in the industries that, where you can't go back to work. I myself have, I'm the parent of an unemployed restaurant industry worker. Obviously, anybody who's in those kinds of fields, or at least a huge proportion of them, are struggling right now. And of course, we know that those tend to be, even to begin with, low-paying jobs that are often minimum wage or just above it. That's the same for the hospitality industry. I mean, North Carolina, let's get one thing straight. Even before all this hit the fan, North Carolina was a divided economy. We had haves and have-nots. We had a huge proportion of our population working in lower wage service industry jobs. We've had this decline in manufacturing. And so things were tough even before. And obviously that had a disproportionate impact on people of color who had traditionally filled those jobs. It's just made it, vastly worse. And the fact that our social insurance system, both here statewide and nationally, has been so sporadic in its response to that, makes things doubly difficult. The approach that other countries took was they shut everything down, relied on social insurance to prop up businesses, to prop up individuals until they could safely reopen. We kind of messed around and did it halfway, and now we're in a pickle because we're reopening, but the numbers are shooting up. We've spent a lot of money, but we're talking about ending social supports and just throwing caution to the wind, opening up society and hoping not too many people die. And that seems to be the direction we're heading. It's certainly the direction the Republican General Assembly has been promoting.
Yeah, that's a good segue into what is your assessment of the job that Governor Roy Cooper has done? Because for a long time, we were nowhere near the top in terms of cases. But again, you do have the General Assembly to contend with. They have thrown some bills over the transom like bills to try to force gyms to open or whatever, knowing full well that they weren't going to be successful. But I think they were playing to their constituents, right? Their core constituents, trying to take
contributors.
a playbook, right? Trying to take a playbook from Donald Trump in that, you say these things knowing full well that they probably aren't going to work. So how do you grade Roy Cooper? And then in an extension of that, what can he do to try to be progressive in his approach, but have to deal with a General Assembly that's clearly not on his side?
There are times when you just think, why does anybody want this darn job? It's such a difficult. I was looking at the poll numbers yesterday on reopening schools. A third of the people think we should just go right ahead. A third of the people think we shouldn't do anything, keep them closed, and a third of people are sort of in the middle. And that's emblematic of some of the struggles he's had. Now, when it comes to most of the safety steps he's taken, they're very popular. There was a new poll out that shows that people like the mask requirement, think it's absolutely essential and important. Cooper's got a tough, wire to walk. He's got to implement policies that protect public health. He's got to deal with a General Assembly that, as you say, is fighting him at every, he's got a lieutenant governor who's running against him and is suing him over his policies that he's chosen. Hasn't provided his own plan, by the way. But at the same time, it's kind of like enforcing the speed limit. You gotta sort of keep your thumb on public opinion and where people are and what they're willing to abide by. It doesn't do any good to put in rules that people aren't going to abide by, because mostly it's going to have to be self-enforced. We're not going to have cops going around arresting people because they're not wearing a mask or, abiding by social distancing. So it's an incredibly difficult job he's got to do. I think all in all, Cooper's not a real inspiring guy. He doesn't get you fired up. He doesn't, give a great speech. But, I think it shows that he's a serious person who's listening to the experts. He's trying his darndest. I think, I'm so glad we're not Texas or Arizona or Florida, where the governors, or Georgia, and said, let's just open everything up, it'll be fine. And now they're paying the price. And, that whole idea of bringing the NBA down to Florida is looking a little shaky right now, given the explosion. And we've got the governor of Texas who's saying, boy, I made a mistake in opening up the bars. That was a big mistake. I think General Cooper has done a pretty good job. I think he probably would have liked to have been more proactive, but he was reading the tea leaves and realizing he couldn't go too far without getting a whole lot of flack.
Yeah, and I think that's always been the quandary here in North Carolina, trying to govern, right? Sometimes you'll have a Democratic governor and then your legislature isn't with you, and vice versa, and you have a difficult time trying to put together any real good, legislative agenda that all the people are going to buy into. I want to switch gears to the elections coming up. We've talked about polls and stuff. And a lot of the polls are looking like Cal Cunningham on U.S. Senate race has the upper hand on Thom Tillis. I saw a poll this morning that said that Joe Biden had the upper hand on Donald Trump and was leading by, it was some crazy number, like 7 points or something here in North Carolina. What does that portend, though, for down ballot, those General Assembly seats, state senator, representative, and even some all the congressional seats are going to be up? Is there an opportunity for the Democrats here, or is the Trump thing an outlier and the Tillis thing an outlier? Because again, North Carolina is really funny in how we elect people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the Democrats ever had a chance. Now, remember, the maps are still gerrymandered. They've been improved a little bit, but they're still drawn to elect a Republican General Assembly. So it's a tough nut to crack. But if there ever was a time, I think Donald Trump has teed it up for people. I saw an ad yesterday, and you've probably seen it, from this Lincoln Project, where they've got these people who are self-identified, pro-life, gun-toting former Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, literally accusing Trump of treason, saying this man is undermining the Constitution of the United States. They are blunt. There are, swear words in these things and personal. It was really amazing. And I think in a state with such a big military presence like North Carolina, I think that could have a big, and Cunningham, heck, he's a vet running against Tillis, who's never served. I think there's a very good chance that it could have a big impact down ballot. obviously we've got a lot of wild cards. You know well that the issue of vote by mail and how the heck we're going to pull off this election during a pandemic is a big issue. But I think there's good reason for Democrats to be very optimistic, and I'm sure a lot of them wish the election were tomorrow instead of in 3 or 4 months.
Really. Yeah, the sooner it can happen, the better for the Democrats. One last thing,
Sure.
and I do appreciate you taking the time to come in, because from time to time I like to have you in to try to get us on the right path and thinking about some broader issues. But we have the election, we got the pandemic, and then we had all this upheaval with the protest over George Floyd, and then the irony is George Floyd is born in Fayetteville, right?
Yep.
The other irony is my pastor from my church in Bun Level, North Carolina, is the bishop of the facility where they had his funeral in Hope Mills. Wow. I go to Minneapolis all the time. I've been in that store where George Floyd was killed, and I was telling folks that sometimes the world is a lot smaller, and you have these connections to people that you don't even realize you have connections to, and then a lot of times they lead back to North Carolina.
It's amazing.
I have been to 48 of the 50 states. I've been to a whole bunch of countries, and I almost invariably run into somebody from North Carolina in all those places or have a connection in North Carolina. So the long way around to my question is how do you see North Carolina when you look at all the other southern states? Can we actually be a model and lead out of this? We have Reverend William Barber here. We have the organization like North Carolina Policy Watch. We have a lot of progressive stuff here, but the General Assembly has been hijacked by the Republicans. How do you take advantage of the fact that you got so many people who are willing to work at progressive issues, but you don't have the ability to do it because we have a General Assembly like we do?
Well, we're a big and important state. We could soon be the 7th largest state in the country within a decade or so. It is, for years, I think North Carolina was viewed, although I look at the policies that Democrats implemented in, say, the 80s and 90s and early 2000s and think, they were kind of middle of the road. But at least compared to the rest of the Southeast, it was seen as sort of a model. Governor Hunt with Smart Start, and heck, we passed a Racial Justice Act in the early mid 2000s. That was something you wouldn't have seen in pretty much any other of the old states of the Confederacy. That being said, the last decade, we have fallen behind. My gosh, we've fallen behind South Carolina when it comes to funding our public schools and per pupil expenditure. Per pupil expenditures, Virginia has sort of soared ahead of us in a lot of different areas. I think there's a bright future still for North Carolina. I'm optimistic. The demographic shift that's underway continues to gain momentum. We are increasingly a more diverse state. We're having more and more people move to the state. The cities are getting bigger. I think that the death knell of gerrymandering has been sounded, and I feel optimistic about the long run. I worry about the crises that afflict us, the crisis like the climate crisis and crises like the racial inequities that afflict our society. We've got some huge problems to solve, but I think that we're headed, I think there's hope. I feel there's hope. I think this coming election is incredibly important. If somehow Trump were reelected and somehow we retain the Republican control of the General Assembly, I think that's going to really set us back, and we've got some real reckoning to do about our future. But I'm feeling some optimism that maybe that won't be the case. So.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping the same thing. I tell you, every time I wake up in the morning, first I'm thankful for being awake and living in this time, because so many things have changed. I never, Rob Scholfield, thought in my lifetime that I would see the Confederate Monument gone.
Yeah, I hear you.
Downtown Raleigh. I spent a lot of time in Mississippi a few years back in Ruleville, Mississippi, and Mound Bayou, and all those places where Fannie Lou Hamer and Medgar Evers, were, and it still had a feeling of being in 1960, and there were Confederate monuments all over the place there, and I never felt welcome or comfortable in a lot of the places I went into. But then state of Mississippi takes the Confederate flag off of their state flag. There are some changes. We do see some things happening. NASCAR, again, another connection in North Carolina, right? They remove Confederate flags from there. So that hopefulness that you have, I have that too. And I like the young energy of people out in the streets and protesting. I do wish some of them would take a step back and look at history, because when you remove monuments, you got to think about what's going to replace it,
right.
And how do you tell history. The problem is that we haven't always told history correctly, because in the first segment we talked about Wilmington, and very few people know about the 1898 in Wilmington and the coup that was down there. Now, there was a lot of talk about Tulsa, but people around the country didn't know about Wilmington. And Wilmington was just as important, if not more important, of a change that happened with free and Black folks who were trying to make a way for themselves. So anyway,
we're going to have an op-ed next week on NC Policy Watch by a Durham pastor who's going to write about the need to, for once and for all, to start teaching accurate African-American history in our public schools in North Carolina, and how that's been so neglected, and how we need to tell that story so that not just African-American kids know their heritage, but that white people know the reality of the state that they live in. And that's something people should look for that. That'll be running next week on NC Policy Watch.
Well, I'm glad you guys are doing it. I didn't get any real African-American history. I was in high school at Harnett Central High School down in Angier, and one teacher had this one class on Black history, and you couldn't take it until you were a senior. And so that would have been 1983, and 82. I took the class and read a book called From Slavery to Freedom by Dr. John Hope Franklin. And then just a couple of years later, I'm sitting in John Hope Franklin's kitchen in Durham, and it was amazing. And a lot of my life has been like that, where I've encountered these people. Again, with another North Carolina connection. From Slavery to Freedom is the definitive book on, how we got to where we are. So anyway, Rob Scholfield, I do appreciate you coming in. I want you back again, and in a couple of weeks, we'll figure out the world in between. And by the time you come back, you'll solve all the world's problems.
Oh yeah, no problem.
No problem. All right. So
anytime, my friend.
All right. That's Rob Scholfield with North Carolina Policy Watch. Look for that article next week on teaching African-American history. In the meantime, I want you guys to be safe this weekend for the 4th of July. Come back to Connections next Sunday on WFXC and WFXK FM. Come back here to The Deal with edclark.com anytime. The newest column this week is about my time in Ruleville, Mississippi, and how I discovered the history of Fannie Lou Hamer and how it changed my life. And then so you guys read that, and we'll see you back next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Peace. Bye-bye.
Thank you.